I know I always said I don't pry into personal lives of my crews, but you could have mentioned that, Mr. Kant said to Captain House, covering the visor of his helmet with his hands. Next to him, Varuna had her own palms pressed to her ears, while Zala covered her mouth. Only Dr. Disco seemed unperturbed by the revelation, probably because he, too, had a relative in a high place, and a much closer relative at that.
I really thought it wouldn't matter,
House replied, looking only slightly embarrassed.
The fact that you're a grandson of warlord fucking Kanta does seem like a rather significant thing to mention, Zala said, shaking slightly. Could have probably saved us a ton of trouble all those times we dodged pirates in outlying sectors.
What? Just because the old hag is my grandmother? Lady, there are hundreds of Kantas out there. That creep has over 100 children, if not more. I'm not sure there's a single person in the sector who can keep track of her grandkids and other relatives.
Hundreds? Varuna asked. I heard rumors about it, but damn, she really goes around, doesn't she?
Used to. Back when she started all this pirate business, she was obsessed with the idea of creating her own kingdom, and the kids she got all the time were supposed to be her royal line. The way I hear it, she still fancies herself a queen now, only now, after some, mess with some of her kids and a succession, she came up with the idea of remaining the queen forever. Surely you heard that she's well over 200 years old.
That would mean she was around before the gates collapsed, Mr. Kant said immediately. Maybe she knows something about it, or maybe we could tell her we're working to restore the network. Surely she too must have wondered what happened back then.
Don't think so, Captain,
House replied, and the look on his face turned awkward. This was clearly a complicated topic for him to talk about.
See, the Kanta that's around today, well, she's not the Kanta from back then. I know you got a bunch of implants that kept you alive for centuries, but the way you said it, you were also designed to live long in that lab. She wasn't. I was a bit close to her back in my raiding days. Enough for her to actually remember my name, and I barely have a clue about specifics of her age. I heard she tried every trick in the book to extend her lifespan, and survived well over a century, but after that she started falling apart. Tried implants, tried transplants, I even heard she got a plan to extract her brain and put it in some young girl's body. One of her daughters, if I remember correctly. But that didn't work out either. So she eventually started looking for other ways. Had her fleets looking and raiding for any info about cloning, and found something in some Tritakian ruin far away from the core. Then she made a copy of herself. Something messed up, barely human. She tried again, and again, and again, until eventually a proper Kanta walked out of that glass tank. And she was so proper, with mentality preserved so well, she immediately murdered original Kanta and took over. Problem was, she did remember some fresh things, but only a handful of old things, all the domain stuff. Said it was irrelevant now, and she kept going like that until her cloned body started failing, so she cloned herself again and again, until she got another, better, angrier and more bloodthirsty Kanta out of the vat. Can't be sure about that, but I heard we're at Kanta number 5 or 6 by now.
Everyone listened to this story with a mix of disgust and confusion. Sure, they all heard rumors, but learning the truth about most notorious pirate in the sector was something else. If it even was the truth, that is. House added that it all might have been just a tale spun by Kanta herself to inflate her ego. But still, her longevity was documented, so at least part of that story probably was true. Guess that's why she sends her raiders all around, Mr. Cat finally said. Whatever cloning tech she has can't be cheap to maintain. But still, this is good. The fact that you know it is good. You said you could talk to her about releasing that Zal woman. Maybe knowing the truth about her will help convince her.
Sorry to say, Captain, but you don't convince Jorian Kanta to do anything. She's she's deranged, to put it bluntly. She's been sitting in the den for over a century now, turning it more and more into a court. Might be something she at least partially remembers from domain days. All the protocol, all the pomp and rituals. The sector may see her as a pirate warlord, her captains may see her as a pirate warlord, but in her head she's the one true queen, which means that when I get there I will have to offer something. A tribute, a gift, something to even get her to talk to me, and maybe from there I will be able to negotiate some favor that we'll have to perform, preferably without dying, to get that Zal woman out of the den, assuming that woman is even still alive.
If she's as smart as Kores thinks she is, she may know something that makes her useful to Kanta. That should ensure her safety,
Varuna said. Yes, and it would also mean that she will not be willing to hand her over. But there is no point guessing. As I said, Kanta lives in an alternate world, and sure, I may be a weird and murderous pirate myself, but I can't even begin to think what's going on in that scared head of hers. We'll see when I get the audience with her.
And can you even ensure she'll let you in? You said it yourself, you didn't exactly leave her fleet on the best terms, the boss asked. In response, House reached under his jacket and pulled out a small, round piece of metal. The symbol of Kanta's raiders was crudely engraved onto it.
With this I can. It is a family token, see? Kanta may want to remain a queen forever, but she's still obsessed about her royal line, and to all her relatives she can track, she sends these tokens, to mark them as one of hers. They used to matter a lot more long ago, before her kids had their kids and suddenly there were around 1,000 Kantas running around, but it should still be enough to let me walk in, especially since, well, I used to be quite good at all that pirate business back in the day. Made her proud several times. Reputations like that should still matter some.
To that, other officers could only nod, because indeed they all knew stories of Captain House, who used to terrorize the starlines around the sector some 3 decades ago.
And what about that gift for her? Varuna asked with a crooked smile. Should we plot a course for some fancy Persian boutique for nobility, so you can pick up something nice for your old granny?
No need, Missy,
House replied, and his usual malicious smile appeared on his face. Even now, after all these years of flying together, that smile was enough to make everyone take a step back.
I have all the things I need right on my ship, and trust me, it will grab her attention, that I can guarantee.
So, with their envoy feeling very confident in his plan, although he refused to say what the gift was, Cat Logistics plotted a course for Magic System, and prepared to once again visit Kanta's den, except this time to have a talk with the station's notorious, murderous, and probably insane ruler. They docked in the inner ring in the usual way, quietly, their fleet transponder turned off. On most other stations, once controlled by established powers, that would attract attention, but on Kanta's den that was just the way things went. The company simply quietly slid into their docking berths, in between dozens of obnoxiously over-designed pirate warships and small, sleek smuggler vessels. A small band of tattooed raiders tried to extort them for money when they docked, but they took one look at House and slinked away, muttering something about other marks. For the last time, Varuna, Zala, Disco, and even Mr. Cat himself asked House if he wouldn't need them to go along to help, but he was determined to go alone. As part of Kanta's freak show, as he called the warlord's extended family, he was probably safe, but everyone else not so much. Also, going alone allowed him to approach Kanta's throne room from an unexpected angle, and as soon as he left the ship, he disappeared into one of the station's unmarked corridors. To an untrained eye, these would look like old maintenance hallways, empty save for pieces of old equipment and occasional squatter, who usually took one look at House and realized that asking for alms was probably not going to end well. The old pirate ducked and weaved across these corridors, entering seemingly random doorways, and sometimes going into vent shafts, which, upon closer examination, turned out to be hiding more access corridors. Every station was a maze of places like this, and aside from rats and some more determined or deranged engineers, no one could really tell how expansive they were. But to House, this was like coming home. He didn't know every single hallway, sure, but he knew enough. Eventually, he reached the place he wanted to be in, a small room with an elevator, and realized, much to his surprise, that some things did change on Kanta's den. He used this elevator to sneak into Kanta's back rooms all the time back in the day, but back then there was never a guard posted here, sitting sleepily in the corner on a folding chair. The man was your average den grunt. Long limbs, tacky tattoos, visible poor quality implants, and a whole bunch of missing teeth. He also had a burst rifle resting on his lap, which could make this approach a bit problematic. Best to not give this man time to think, House thought, if he was even capable of thinking. He emerged from the shadows, walking the walk of someone who absolutely necessarily had to be there, but also didn't want to.
"Hi there, mate,"
he muttered to the guard while flashing his Kanta family token. The grunt almost stood up, but the sight of the piece of metal made him relax again.
"Backdoor shift again, eh?"
The man nodded knowingly. House nodded too, and for a brief moment they were just two grunts nodding at each other, dismayed by the state of the universe at large. Out there were hegemonies, leagues, corporations, pirate queens, and abandoned ancient jump gates. But here there were back doors and rusty elevators that needed guarding. The stars themselves could have gone dark, but these kind of doors, somewhere, sometime, would still need guarding. And to people like this grunt, this was a comfort, even though he lacked the vocabulary to describe what he felt. They nodded like that for around 30 seconds, as the elevator descended to their floor, just two low-level cogs in the great, never-stopping machine of humanity, and House was happy that he made it through this last hurdle. But then, as the doors to the elevator opened with a ding, even in space it was always a ding, the guard stood up from his chair once again.
"Gonna have to check your pockets, familiar,"
he said with a hint of apology in his voice.
"Know the drill, do ya, eh?"
Now that, House thought as his mind went into overdrive, was not part of the plan. Kanta must have gone real paranoid in recent years, if she had her goons frisk even her own family members. But he had a plan for that situation as well. Without missing a beat, he reached under his jacket and pulled out a bottle of something blue. A bizarre creature was painted on the wrapper.
"Yeah, I know, worry not, mate. Got me 3 bottles of Voltanian lobster brandy as a gift for the old lady."
He tapped his jacket again, and a sound of clinking glass could be heard.
"Or, more precisely, I got 2 bottles. And this one here with your name on it. How about that? Pretty sure I'd prefer to deliver it to old Jorian without her knowing about that beforehand."
Guard's eyes widened, and with a good reason. There were not many things warlord Kanta verifiably liked. She was more of a "I hate everything, but today I despise this one thing a bit less" kind of person. But Voltanian lobster brandy was one of her favorites, and handing her something like that would probably mean she would look at the gift giver with significant approval. His eyes immediately glazed over, with visions of never again being forced to sit in this empty room the size of a storage locker. Maybe he would even guard her throne itself if he gave his bottle to her. Or hell, maybe he'd even end up being taken out on a raid or two with her current favorite captains. Of course, Kanta could have simply ripped this bottle off his cold dead hands if she wanted to, but the guard was not a man who thought that far ahead. Instead, he grabbed the bottle greedily from House's hands and waved him along into the elevator. The old pirate smiled as the doors locked behind him. Grunts were always the same, no matter where he went. Small-minded, greedy lot who would throw their lives at the slightest chance of improving their standing, without sparing even a single thought about the consequences. His smile then faded a bit as he realized that, not that long ago, he was just like this man. It was weird how family changed a man. Still, this was just a single step of his plan. Now, as he rode up across several dozen levels of the station, he'd have to prepare for the main event, meeting with Kanta herself. Fortunately, his memory of the station was intact, and the elevator spat him out roughly near the kitchens of the court. The ancient warlord might have subsisted mostly on a diet of medical concoctions that prevented decomposition of her cloned body, but she still liked to throw a wild party for her raiders, and the kitchens were as busy as ever. House even noticed a few familiar faces, but people here were way too busy to bother him, and he made his way up to the throne room, entering it by a small side door, hidden behind a column made from an upturned nose of a Tritachyon strike fighter. The place was as tacky and tasteless as ever. Kanta really took her title as queen to heart, and this place really did look like a throne room, if it was made by someone with absolutely zero taste and an obsession with jagged, serrated metal. Every table, every chair was made entirely out of metal scrap ripped from some starship, preferably with markings of one of the major powers like the hegemony clearly visible for everyone to see. The columns were made out of strikecraft or large ground weapons, like tanks or power suits, all bashed together into a mess that made no architectural or aesthetic sense at all, but still it somehow kept this room and its occupant together. The entire cavernous hall was bathed in blood-red light hanging from the ceiling, with a few of them located behind Kanta's throne, yet another pile of scrap metal, which looked like a torture device. Every spiky bit on it had some sort of official insignia impaled on it, markings of officers from Hegemony, Church, Tritachyon or Persian League, or, House knew, from other pirates, ones who failed to defer to Jorian Kanta's whims. This time there was also a life specimen tied to the bottom of the throne, a young woman whose uniform marked her as commander of a Hegemony trade convoy, a poor soul who made a mistake of being captured alive. House took one look at her and knew that she was still alive, but she probably very much wished she wasn't. And there, at the top of the throne, sat entity that was Jorian Kanta, a mismatched amalgamation of cloned parts, mechanical implants in sheer, utter bloodthirsty madness. Some of her captains, adjutants and sycophants were in the room, but she paid them no attention, instead focusing her eyes on the torn-apart Hegemony officer tied to the feet of her throne. There was a hungry look on her face.
"Ahoy there, Granny Jorian,"
House proclaimed loudly, stepping out from behind the pillar, his arms spread wide. Immediately, a whole bunch of people pointed their guns at him. If all of them pulled their triggers just once, House would turn into a wet smear on the nearest wall.
"Oh, that how you meet your blood now, Granny? Or did you clone yourself yet again and forgot them bonds you always blather on so much about?"
He continued, still walking forward, flashing his token. The guards lowered their guns a bit, but barely. Kanta did not respond. Instead, she turned her head from side to side like a dog, or like an enraged bull, looking House up from head to toe. Her implants whirred and clacked, filling the room with mechanical cacophony.
"Stars fuck me sideways, I really did end up like her,"
House thought in his head. But since the warlord still remained silent, he kept walking, until suddenly another person emerged from behind Kanta's throne. A small, thin, rat-like man, wearing some rubber-made parody of doctor's garb covered in blood, no doubt belonging to that Hegemony officer at his feet. He looked at House for a second, and then recognition flashed in his eyes.
You dare to show yourself here?"
he asked, pointing with his bony finger.
"Warlord Kanta shall not suffer!" "Shut up, Sidonia. Family stalking,"
House barked angrily. This was the time to act like a pirate. He knew this man, Wyatt Sidonia, a self-proclaimed medical genius. No one knew where he came from or what his education really was, but he was the man who helped Kanta clone herself over and over again. The way he walked and talked, old demands and ego, made House think he was from Tritachyon originally. It would certainly explain his knowledge of cloning, and that he had in spades.
"Family!"
The rubber glove shaked a bit, as the doctor saw that House was not stopping.
"We know, you traitor! You are not family, you are an outcast! Worse, you are the Doctor!"
Kanta finally boomed, and her voice echoed across the entire room. She turned her solid blue eyes to House and then to her doctor.
"Will be silent. Family will talk. He will not interrupt."
There we go, House thought as Jori and Kanta waved to her goons. They all lowered their weapons but kept them close, a clear sign that violence may still happen, should a wrong word be said and the lady of the house feel offended. But Dr. Sidonia, even though he shrank at the sound of Kanta's voice, refused to fully back down.
"The great and magnificent warlord Kanta shall listen to you, traitor,"
he said with venom, bowing deferently to his queen. She paid him no mind.
"Yes, Kanta shall listen to her wayward child, and then she shall decide what to do with him."
And then she sat down, silent. House stared at her, expecting an approval to speak, but after she counted to 5, his grandmother still remained motionless, so he stepped forward and braced himself for negotiations.
"I won't take much of your time, Jorian. All I want is to parley and make trade. There is a woman in your custody, Elissa Zal, she's called. She doesn't belong here, and I'm willing to buy her off of you. Simple flesh trade, nothing more, nothing less. And," he started, pulling 2 bottles from under his jacket, "I'm willing to give you these 2 bottles of Volturnian Blue, both plundered from the King of Westerness himself for her. Surely they're worth more to you than some random spacers you caught in a raid. I'd say it's a fair price."
He realized he made a mistake in the very moment he stopped talking. Kanta threw him a death glare from his throne and roused to her feet.
"Fair, the wayward kin says," she boomed. "Worth, he says. He, a traitor who fled his blood, who dared to deny warlord Kanta her family, now dares to dictate what is or is not worthy of her."
"I didn't deny you anything, Kanta."
House took a cautious step back, as all around him the goons started raising their weapons again.
"I did not harm anyone of your kin when I left, and besides, we had a deal. I said I would never compete with your raiders, and you were to leave me alone."
"Lies. The wayward kin lies, as he lied all those years ago. He says a deal was made, but he only dared to open his mouth about this deal after he fled the station. He never waited for warlord Kanta's response."
"I didn't need to. You always said it yourself. Kanta's word is Kanta's bond. So I left, and I followed my promise to the letter."
"How can this malicious thing lie so brazenly when warlord Kanta knows his ship is docked in the station? Ship that he stole from his blood and his warlord."
"Yes, well, believe it or not, it was not me who stole it. It was, an associate."
"House will be silent. Stealing his ship is not near as vile a crime as the one he committed when he left. He extended Kanta's family. He brought another kin into this world. By right of warlord Kanta, his child belongs to the family, and yet he fled with it, without handing the young one to his warlord. All of Kanta's blood belongs to Kanta. He knows this."
House was now pretty sure that the trade would not happen. He knew that all children born by Kanta's extended family had to be given to her as a sort of deranged tribute. His own parents gave him away too, way before he was old enough to even remember them. And this was precisely what he wanted to keep his daughter away from.
"How the fuck did you even learn about my family, Jorian?"
he asked. Perhaps at least he could learn where he made a mistake back when he fled.
"You have failed her brilliance's trust,"
another female voice said, and a red-haired, pale woman emerged from the crowd of guards.
"But she still has loyal subjects."
"Harbor,"
House growled, and his eyes went narrow. The woman who convinced another rookie pirate to pretend to be House's daughter. The one who blackmailed him when she learned friendly welcome was still flying. It all made sense. A bottom feeder like Harper would happily track down his wife and daughter and drag them into this chaotic life just for approval of her warlord.
The Harper woman learned about her. She told Warlord Kanta about money this treacherous kin has been sending to them.
Did she also told you how she tried to bring bounty hunters on my daughter's head by forcing one of your goons to pretend to be her?
House asked, and Kanta's face immediately changed. She turned to Harper.
Is the kin lying? Did she fabricate a plot like that?
She asked, placing her hand on Harper's head.
Yes,
she replied, confused.
That way I could track her down and bring her...
She paused and howled in pain as Kanta squeezed her forehead. House knew how painful it must have been. The old warlord might have looked like a mismatched amalgamation of body parts and outdated implants, but beneath these multicolored patches of skin were muscles designed by Sidonia, powered up additionally by mechanical servos. It was like being caught in a vice.
Kanta's blood belongs to Kanta!
The warlord snarled at the pirate woman, who was now squealing in pain, waving her arms around. But even now, Harper was too terrified of her boss to try and smack her arms away.
None shall touch her kin, save for other kin. Harper made a mistake. Harper must be punished.
And then she closed her fist. Harper's scream lasted less than a second, replaced by a wet noise as her forehead caved in and Kanta's fingers crushed her brain. The rest of her body flopped to the ground where, House knew, it would remain until it would start to rot, as an example to everyone else. The old pirate quietly congratulated himself on accidentally removing one issue from his life, but his joy didn't last long, as Kanta turned to him and raised both her hands in anger.
And the wayward kin, he comes here thinking he can trade. He comes here thinking he can parley like family, without obeying the laws of the family. He owns blood that belongs to Kanta, and Kanta will spill it if she has to learn where the other kin is. He shall have no trade until family is reunited. He shall be seized by the guards now.
The rifles were raised. The goons stepped forward, but House only smiled maliciously.
Then I guess I'm going to have to kill everyone here then,
he said, and something in his voice made Kanta twitch. All these years of feeling like a queen in her own castle, and now, suddenly, her own mortality stared her in the face. House understood. At her age, after everything she's done to prolong her life, or lives, she took existence for granted.
The boy must know he shall not leave this place alive,
the warlord snarled, and everyone but House would swear that she was not intimidated at all. But he could see it. Kanta was starting to be afraid. And what's more, she was afraid of being afraid in front of her people.
Warlord Kanta will ensure his death will be a warning for others.
And that's the kind of end I deserve, Granny.
House smiled viciously, and Kanta shuddered like this show of defiance caused her physical pain.
So do it. If I die, I still win. You'll never find my family if I'm gone. And I'd say, trading my worthless existence for theirs, I'll take that deal.
Kanta tried to say something, but House's smile grew even wider, and he opened up his coat. A suicide vest, courtesy of one of the Ludic Path crewmates from the fleet, was wrapped around his mechanical body.
One bottle of the blue staff, Granny. That's how little I had to sleep your elevator guard to not frisk me. That's how much your life is worth, and mine is worth even less. So, shall we have a deal, or shall we have a disagreement?
Kanta's eye kept twitching, but she gave her people a sign to lower her weapons. Now that she could see the bomb strapped to House's chest, she knew it would be enough to not only kill everyone in her throne room, but would also rip a hole in the side of the station. Somewhere in her mad brain, she felt a tinge of respect for her grandson. It was the kind of insane move she would have normally been proud of, if it wasn't aimed at her. But it was, so that respect was drawn by fury, but that was also drowned by self-preservation instinct. Sure, Sidonia no doubt had another clone of Kanta somewhere to replace her, but even though Warlord Kanta would remain, she, the entity that was current her, would evaporate. She didn't want that, but she also couldn't allow this youngling to disrespect her like that in her own court. She took a step forward, but that only made House put his finger on the detonator. They stared at each other like that for what seemed like an hour, until suddenly Dr. Sidonia scampered close to the Warlord and whispered to her.
"Perhaps we can use this wild one, oh great Warlord. His eyes are mad enough to go for cotton."
Kanta winced, as if she was punched.
"Cotton! He shall be delivered to Warlord Kanta in a box, his severed head placed at his burnt feet. If the wayward kin wishes to parley, he shall find this creature and deliver his corpse to his warlord's feet."
House raised his eyebrow, slightly confused.
Cotton? You mean, I only heard about one person named like that, some terrorist from the Ludic Path.
"Lud's hound shall be slaughtered by this wayward kin's hand,"
Kanta confirmed in her unusual way.
"And if kin wants to even dream about casting his eyes at the Zal woman he wants so much, he shall not just cull the rabid dog, he shall also recover Locke and return it to his rightful place at his warlord's throne."
"Right, I've been wondering where your little pet went,"
House replied. This Locke, Kanta meant, was a clone of Onesimus Locke, another pirate warlord from long, long ago. Shortly after the gates collapsed, he was the greatest threat to the sector, rampaging across the stars. Kanta served him for a while, the old original Kanta, but when the original died, the clone that replaced her betrayed Locke and wrestled control of the stations they were now on from his forces. And, in a way, with that betrayal, Kanta did save the post-collapse Persian sector from being turned into a barbaric land of raiders. Hegemony couldn't contain Warlord Locke, Tritakion couldn't contain him, altogether the nations couldn't contain him. But while navies failed, Kanta succeeded with a single shot in the dark, which collapsed Locke's empire and made her the new pirate powerhouse of the sector. One that was, hard to believe, slightly less insane than her predecessor. She then took the body of her former master and used it to make clones of him, to use as pets, as she called them. In truth, it was a power move. She wanted everyone to see she was now in charge of the dreaded warlord himself. She always had that clone somewhere close, except now it seemed that it was taken away. And that wouldn't really be a problem, if not for the fact that, according to Kanta, Locke's clone has been kidnapped by none other but infamous Brother Cotton, who was known across the Persian sector as the most wanted and most deadly terrorist of the Ludic Path. House wanted to ask how did she even know he was the one who took the clone, but he realized that Kanta was getting twitchy, and he really didn't want to detonate his vest. So instead he bowed down with deference and said,
"Your will shall be done, great warlord. I shall return with Locke, and with Cotton's head."
"The wayward kin shall not fail, or else the wayward kin shall realize the cost of failure,"
Kanta replied, to have the last word, and then waved House off as she returned to her throne. He bowed down again and walked out back towards the kitchens, still tightly holding the detonator, as the guard walked close behind him, their rifles still ready to fire. Fortunately, they didn't try anything stupid, and he safely reached the elevator. He rode all the way down, tapped the sleepy guard on the shoulder, and told him that maybe he should make himself scarce, and left before the confused man could ask any questions. Still, he did what he could. If the guard was smart enough, he'd disappear within seconds, sell the bottle and make a new life for himself far, far away from here. The old pirate then lost himself in the maze of corridors for well over an hour, making sure he wasn't followed. Then, after finally shaking off the last tail, he started walking back to the dock, opened up the comm channel to Mr. Card and said,
"Bit of a problem, Captain. We have ourselves a terrorist we need find."
He waited with more explanations until he returned to the fleet, because he was well aware they could all end up dead anyway. Sure, he walked out of Kanta's throne room, but he was still on her station. The entire company was docked on her station, surrounded by hundreds of pirate warships. If she wanted to have them killed, she could order that right away, but House understood that would make her look weak, and that was unacceptable. So, the company was allowed to leave peacefully, and then House described to his fellow officers how the talk with Kanta went. Needless to say, they were not amused, but for now, they focused on the objective.
"I only heard rumors about this Cotton," Varuna said after House was done talking, "and none of them painted him as an easy man to find. Where should we even start?"
"Hesperus," Zala replied. She was quiet during House's tirade and deep in thought for a few minutes afterwards, but now she looked at Varuna and Mr. Cart with an uncommon determination in her eyes.
"If he is not in transit or preparing some attack somewhere, he'll be on Hesperus. I have no clue why he would steal a clone from Kanta, though. He must have known it would have incurred her wrath. But more than that, he considered clones to be an abomination to be purged with fire."
"Lovely man," Mr. Cart said, and Varuna nodded. They both had a bit of a stake there, after all. "I assume you know something about him from your time on the path?"
"Well, yes,"
Zala said, and there was a sadness in her voice. Her one good eye looked into the distance, staring at nothing, or at something from the past only she could see.
"He is the reason why I left the path, why I realized just how deranged that cult is." "Well, that sounds like him," Varuna said. "What did he do?" "He was himself. Cotton is, well, not a man who strays from the path he believes in, not even an inch. But the path he follows is too much, even for the Ludic Church. Even they have a warrant for bringing him dead, not alive. I don't know what made him like this, but he thinks the entire universe is sick, that the human race is sick. In his mind, all those who don't follow his warped version of the path to the letter are a cancer that needs to be removed, whatever the cost. Here's a man who would destroy an entire planet just to take out a single person he considers to be a heretic there, and all others caught in the crossfire would be acceptable, honorable casualties to him. Hell, he wanted to do something like that. He wanted to do a second Mayrath."
The atmosphere became heavy in the room. Everyone knew about Myrath, a world once terraformed by the Domain. Over a century ago, Ludic Path preachers decided that an Eden made by human hand was violating the will of God. Only naturally habitable planets were approved. To turn a barren wasteland into a green garden was, in their minds, stepping into divine territory. And so the fanatics took control of the orbital station above the planet and then crashed it into the surface. Within a single moment, a beautiful world became a mass grave, covered in dust, sand, and untold corpses. To hear that something like that almost happened again was blood-chilling, and knowing that the company now had to find the man who wanted to commit such an act made them realize that this might be a bit more complicated than they thought. Still, Varuna did wonder about something else.
"You said he wanted to do it. Where? What stopped him?" "On Jangala," Zala replied. "He said hegemony was not deserving of a lush green world like that it was yet another breeding ground for technocrats who disobeyed words of Lud. But I've been on Jangala. There are Ludic communities there. Hell, there are Ludic temples and shrines all over the planet. And yet he wanted to torch it all, to kill so many decent, innocent people, just to send a message to hegemony. That's when I realized he was utterly insane. That the path was not the cult of Lud, but the cult of death. That's all they want, for everyone to die, not just non-believers, but themselves too. So I stopped him. When we docked on Jangala Station, I convinced some people from our team to help me stop Cotton. He managed to flee, but at least Jangala survived, and Hegemony was warned about his actions.
That's Dane, Varuna said, not knowing how to respond to such a revelation. But that means you do know him personally, right?
Yes, and when we reach Hesperus, I volunteer to go and look for him. Kanta wants him dead, and he and I have unfinished business to deal with.
Very well, but you really shouldn't try to find him alone. Varuna could go with you, the boss said, and his lieutenant nodded.
Now, she has visible implants, which will bring the entire world down on our heads. I can blend in, and I know enough about Cotton to try and figure out when he may be. Trust me, it will be easier to do on my own. But one thing, Chief. All of this, the gates, the academy, Kanta, High Hegemon, you must know that the moment we're no longer useful for them, they're going to hunt us down. And you know we can't fight them, so before I walk into Hesperus Underground and probably get myself killed, I want to know, what exactly are you planning to do when this all falls apart?
Mr. Card did not reply for a moment. Instead, he removed his helmet, and for the first time since that day they found him in his cabin, looked at his officers with his own malformed eyes, a parody of human face. "I want to leave," he finally said. "If we can repair the gates, I want to use them to leave Persean Sector, and to never return again."